Chapter 3 of The Wheel of Fortune by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3 The Projected Burglary. The funeral of Mrs. Edward Hawley, the expenses of which were defrayed by a private subscription headed by Lemuel Potts, was largely attended by those who had associated with the dead woman during her days of prosperity. Bert Hawley was chief mourner, his father being in no condition to be present. Everybody felt sorry for the boy and had a kind word of encouragement for him, that is, most everybody. Jonas Potts, we are sorry to say, sneered at Bert's grief on the quiet, and refused to go to the funeral with his father, mother, and sister. Helen Potts, however, made up for her brother's shortcomings. She sat beside Bert in the ruined parlor of the Hawley cottage, while the minister spoke of the dead woman's virtues and charities, and affections she had borne so many years with Christian resignation. She stood beside Bert as his mother's body was lowered into her last resting place, and placed her arms lovingly about his neck when the lad sank on his knees in a paroxysm of grief as the clods of earth struck with a hollow thud upon the box containing the coffin. At last it was all over. Bert, declining a polite invitation from Lawyer Potts to spend the afternoon and night at his house, went home with a neighbor who had offered him the shelter of his humble home until the boy had decided what he should do. 3 days passed away, and then Bert informed his kind host that he had determined to leave Jayville and seek a broader field for making his way in the world. "Where do you expect to go?" asked the friendly farmer curiously. "I shall strike for Baltimore, which is the nearest big city, and if nothing turns up there, I mean to go to Philadelphia or New York." "Well, I wish you luck, my boy. When do you mean to start?" "This evening. I'll walk over to Rye Junction and take the late accommodation train for the city." After dinner, Bert went over to the house of one of Ed Hawley's old chums, where his stricken father had been taken the night of his wife's death. "Your father went away after breakfast this morning, and we haven't seen him since," replied the wife of Hawley's friend, when Bert said he had come to see his parent. "I'm going to leave Jayville tonight, and would like to see him before I go. When he comes back, tell him I will stop here on my way to Rye Junction before dark." With these words, Bert left the house and started out to make a few farewell calls. The last visit he reserved for Helen Potts. But when he reached her house, he was informed that Miss Helen was out calling at a friend's house and was not expected home until after tea time. Lawyer Potts had gone to the county town on business, and had taken Mrs. Potts with him. Jonas Potts, whom Bert had no desire to see, had gone fishing with a chum. The boy was sadly disappointed because he would have to leave the village without saying good-bye to Helen, who had been so kind and sisterly to him, especially in his recent affliction. "I'm afraid she'll think it strange of me," he mused as he looked his way toward the churchyard to view his mother's grave for the last time. "But what can I do? At any rate, she will know that I called." Bert lingered long near his mother's grave. His heart was desolate and sore, and he paid no heed to the flight of time. It was after 6 o'clock when he passed through the gate of God's Acre into the lonesome road, and the shadows of evening were beginning to gather and to creep down upon the face of the peaceful landscape. "It is later than I thought," muttered the boy as he walked briskly down the road. "I'll have to take a short cut through the White Acre Wood." He soon left the road for that purpose. It would save him at least 3/4 of a mile of walking. The shadows were thick among the trees, as if this was their marshalling ground. The soft earth deadened the sound of his rapid stride. The boy looked neither to the right nor to the left as he pressed forward in all haste, for he knew his kind farmer friend would be keeping his supper warm against his return, and he hated to be the occasion of trouble to the excellent couple who had so kindly befriended him in his hour of trial. Suddenly, and without the least warning, the ground gave way beneath his weight, and he sank a dozen feet with the rush of earth which accompanied his fall. This had been accomplished with scarcely a sound, and with no injury to Bert, who found himself upon his hands and knees in the middle of a dry ditch. As he started to extricate himself from the loose dirt, which covered his legs up to his knees, he heard the sound of voices on the other side of the hedge. He would have paid little attention to this, but that one of the voices sounded very like that of his father, who was apparently sober. Peeping through the hedge, Bert saw that he had not been mistaken. His father was there, and with him 2 rough-looking men, one of whom he identified as Rake, the hired hand who had been one of the original causes of Ed Hawley's misfortunes. Rake looked decidedly disreputable, and his companion was not a bit better. Bert was much grieved to see his father in such questionable company, now that he was not under the influence of liquor. Still, what else could be expected of a man who for the last 10 years had been going to the dogs, without any regard whatever for public opinion? "I'm afraid this will be my only chance to speak to my father," said the boy to himself as he gazed on the trio, who seemed to be in earnest converse. "But I hate to say what I wish to tell him before those men." It happened, however, that the interview he had in mind did not take place, for the first words that struck upon his ears rather startled him. "It is agreed, then, that the 3 of us shall break into Lawyer Potts' house this evening?" spoke Rake, a greedy light shining from his little green eyes. "Yes," replied Ed Hawley a bit reluctantly. "Sure," interjected the 3rd ruffian glibly. "We couldn't have a better chance," pursued Rake cunningly. "I found out that Potts himself and the old woman have gone to Branchtown. The kid, Jonas, won't be home until late. There'll be nobody but the 2 servants and the gal left to oppose us, and I reckon they won't count much, will they, Harrow?" "I should say not," grinned his boon companion. "You owe the old rascal a grudge for doing you out of them 6 acres of land, Hawley, and now's your opportunity to square old scores. While you will feather your nest with the banknotes, which I happen to know are in the house at this blessed minute." "Yes," said Hawley with a dark frown, "I owe him a grudge, and it's chiefly on that account that I'm with you hand and glove. He ruined me, and I shall never be happy until I get back at him." "That's right," said Rake, slapping him on the back while he winked at his companion over Hawley's shoulder. "I was beginning to be afraid you lost your backbone, but I see I was mistaken. Here, take another swig of this. It's prime old stuff, and come all the way from Baltimore." He handed the deluded man a suspicious-looking flask, which Hawley greedily accepted and put to his lips as if it were the choicest nectar instead of Satan's tipple. Bert was horrified at what he overheard, and stood like a statue behind the hedge, not knowing what he ought to do under the circumstances. He wanted to call out and warn his father against the perpetration of the contemplated crime, but he was afraid it would do no good, and only serve to bring down on him the vengeance of the 2 ruffians, if not also the anger of his own father. "We shall have no trouble getting into the house from the rear. The window of the washroom will open at the invitation of this pretty little tool," and Rake exhibited a short steel jimmy. "And this," he added, producing a revolver, "will keep the women in line till we've gone through the house." "You say you know the Lawyer Potts has money on the premises?" asked Hawley, moistening his lips with his tongue. "Well, I guess," grinned Rake as he replaced the revolver in his hip pocket. "How do you know?" persisted his questioner, evidently not thoroughly convinced of the fact. "Because after he had gone away this morning, Farmer Whitemore called at his house and left $600 for him with his daughter." This seemed to satisfy Hawley, though Rake did not explain how he came by the information. "There ought to be some nice pickings in the way of jewelry and silverware," suggested Harrow. "Sure thing," said his friend who was managing the enterprise. "Lots of it. We can hide it somewheres in the neighborhood till excitement blows over." "Right you are. We can stow it away in the cellar of Hawley's tumble-down cottage till it's safe to come after it. No one's likely to go there." "That's what we'll do with it," nodded Rake, the plan striking him as a good one. "You're counting your chickens before they're hatched, I'm thinking," put in Hawley. "Better wait till we get hold of the stuff." "Oh, we'll get it if it's in the house, and I reckon it's there all right," said the ringleader with a contemptuous glare at Hawley. "Sure we will," nodded Harrow. "What can 3 women do against us men after we get inside? It'll be a cinch. It's nearly dark, and time for us to be on the move. We've got to do the job early before the lawyer and his old woman gets back." The 3 men thereupon rose to their feet and walked away through the wood. End of chapter 3.